kind of step change of an effort to destroy ISIS that I think is called for, and that I think would be the part of a real discussion about ground troops.
What do you think, Ambassador Volker, if I could just follow up, would be the ultimate solution, as you said, to achieve the goal, very briefly from you?
Well, I think it's going to take a combination of things. You're going to need a very significant air campaign with a high degree and tempo of targeting. You're going to need spotters on the ground, as we are beginning to put in now. You're also going to need a coordinated coalition ground force that takes the territory from ISIS and holds it. The biggest complicating factor here is not that. That could be done if we were willing to put the effort into it. The biggest complicating factor is going to be coordinating with Russia, because Russia is in there as well, and Russia is supporting the Assad regime, and Russia has been attacking some of the very forces that are not ISIS that we would want to work with to take over from ISIS. So that's going to be the one very tricky element of this.
Right.
And then, of course, at the end of all that, there has to be a negotiation for a political settlement.
Certainly. Before I go to the Russian panelists, let me go back to you, Ambassador Gartenstein-Ross. Coordination with Russia, discussion with Russia, whatever you want to have it, or domestic discussion inside Washington about what to do next, which seems to be more challenging to you, at least at this stage?
Well, in terms of coordination with Russia, I think one of the fundamental problems is that the U.S. still hasn't fully worked through what its end game is overall in Iraq and Syria. Obviously, on the ISIS side of the equation, I think that there is a desired end state, the destruction of ISIS. But as Ambassador Volker articulates, it's been very piecemeal and rather insufficient steps that have been taken. On the other side of the equation, you obviously have Assad, where the U.S. and Russia are on very different sides. And the U.S. has fluctuated a bit. I mean, a couple of years ago, Secretary Kerry was analogizing Assad to Hitler, and now you instead have a softening of rhetoric where maybe Assad can go at the end of a negotiated process, which obviously is not the approach you would take of dealing with a Hitler. So I think that there's this strategic drift in terms of what Washington's goal is with respect to Assad, but Assad is still a sticking point. And a second sticking point is that the U.S. does not agree with the kind of tactics that Russia has carried out, specifically finding its bombing to be insufficiently targeted, and thus would not want to have an explicit alliance, although obviously they want to deconflict so that Russia and the U.S. don't end up in an air war.
I see this discussion is 2-1. Therefore, I would like to invite our female panelist, Professor Panova from Russia, to respond to the points that these gentlemen just raised. First of all, of course, the Assad issue, and secondly, whether it is efficient, the Russian bombing, or actually the Russian bombing is looking at other targets rather than the ISIL itself.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, with regards to Assad regime, I cannot quite understand what's the point about discussing Assad. Assad is the only legitimate government at the moment. The only thing Russia has been throughout the times insisting on is that there is a political process involving all the political parties, not terrorists, but all the ones take a moderate opposition, but take also pro-Assad people, so that they sit behind the table and talk. And this is, from what I remember, was decided upon, agreed in Vienna. And hopefully this will be done around early 2016. At least this was the agreement. So I do not quite see why there should be a forceful elimination of Assad by some other country which has nothing to do with Syria. It should be Syrian process, and this is exactly what Russia supports. Now, taken with their other points,
the bombing.
You were talking about their, the bombing. I would say I hope that this U-turn, as you called it, but this sending of some troops, it's not a big input yet, but this and the start of operations by the UK, by Germany, this is not because Russia was more successful than the previous anti-terrorist so-called coalition efforts. But this is because those countries are also interested in eliminating ISIS and fighting against this terrorist so-called state, which is not state. So my hope is that this is a real strategic turn, as pronounced by my esteemed colleagues on the other side, but not a desire to come in because Russia was more successful in fighting terrorism. And just notice that suddenly the UK started bombing their oil fields after the accusations started coming that ISIS is trading oil with Turkey, and Turkey is a NATO member, right? So I do hope this is a turn for cooperation, high cooperation with Russia. And if you talk about bombing moderate opposition, if I remember right, Putin and the government were asking for rages to provide for intelligence data of where not to bomb, and had continuous rejection of providing for such data.
That's a good point.
That's why I'm a bit puzzled.
That's a good point. Professor Gartenstein-Ross, very briefly from you, is intelligence cooperation possible, at least for the very first step?
Well, certainly there'll be, I think, some intelligence cooperation, but I think it'll be very limited between them. It'll basically be, number one, deconfliction in the air, and number two, trying to prevent Russia from bombing forces that the U.S. Is backing, though that may, in practice, end up being difficult for a number of reasons that I think are beyond the scope of this panel discussion.
Ambassador Volker, is there an issue of competing for the leadership internationally in terms of who is going to be the pillar of forces against ISIL? It seems that Moscow has already shown its true color, at least to a certain extent. What about Washington? Is this the beginning of another game?
Yeah, I don't think this is about the United States or Russia. I think it's about ISIS. And I'm disappointed that the U.S. has not been more assertive and aggressive in going after ISIS over the past few years. We may be seeing the beginnings of a change in that approach. I think Russia has not yet stepped up the fight against ISIS either. It has gone after some other groups and it is backing Assad, but it has not fully gone after ISIS, just as we have not. I hope that this is the beginning of a turnaround on that. And if I may just comment on the intelligence sharing issue, I don't think there is a great need for intelligence sharing, because I think Russia already has all the intelligence it needs, because it's obviously targeting these groups and attacking them, as it was attacking the Turkmen on the northern Syrian border just last week. So I'm not sure there is such a great need for intelligence sharing.
Okay. Final 10 seconds for you, Professor Panova. I know it's unfair, but we only have 10 seconds left. So your response to the two gentlemen's comments, and also, will Russia play a leadership role, you think, against ISIL?
I think it's already playing leadership role. And instead of the answer, just a few comparison. Russia was sharing intelligence even without having direct interest in that when United States went to in Afghanistan. So this is number one. And I wouldn't claim that United States didn't have enough capacity for their for the intelligence sharing. And I do have more comments, but especially with regards to campaign in Afghanistan and trade with Iran at the same time while it was under sanctions, and also implications that it had. But I'll probably withdraw with those actions for the moment.
That would already give us 3 topics for the future to discuss about. But for now, I want to thank the 3 of you for your input.